Hello everyone, today we're going to take a look at the relationship between pitch, power, and performance. Now this is an interesting term, and some of you who are instrument pilots will immediately recognize that one. For the rest of us, it's kind of an exercise in what you do when you're approaching with that throttle. Now, one of the things we have here is if you kind of take a look out the window, is we're sneaking up on Bradley's runway. This is ILS for 6, so we're here in the Cirrus. Everything's been pre-configured. We're pretty much ready to go. The automatic pilot has got us locked in. You can see we're coming in at about 154 knots. But there's a couple of things I also want you to kind of be aware of, and as we're going through this, things will make a little more sense too. One thing you'll observe is the fact that my nose right now is sticking about 3 or 4 degrees, not even, let's call it about 3 degrees above the horizon. That is our current pitch. Our current power right now is about 66% power. That's, of course, 2,700 RPM. And you can see that our manifold pressure is about 19 inches or so. Now, with those two things in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle back, and we're going to come down to about 30% power here. Now, I'll pull it to just a couple more. Just tap, tap, tap. Yeah, it's going to be close enough. So you're going to see a couple things start to happen. The first thing you'll observe is the fact that the nose of the aircraft is now pitching up. And you'll notice that my airspeed is decreasing. Where we were at 3 degrees a moment ago, you can see we're up to 4 or 5 degrees now that we're going. But one thing to observe is that our altitude has not changed. Remember that the formula for lift is the square of speed times obviously air density times whatever your lift coefficient is. So one of the things you have to remember is that we get our lift from how fast we're traveling. On top of that, of course, we get it based on how much of a bite of the air we're actually chunking out right now. And I've misspoken already, and you all can call me on that all day you want. You can see we pitched up. That was actually the 2.5 degree. We're up now closer to 3 degrees as we were now. So the thing to observe here is that we've vastly reduced our power here. Our speed has come down quite dramatically, and now our nose relative to the horizon is significantly higher than it was before, but the aircraft has not lost any of its altitude as it's actually started to approach. Now, the reason these things are all related to each other is if I wanted to adjust the current angle of attack of this particular aircraft, all I would have to do is go ahead and increase the power. If I were to take my throttle and push it all the way forward to basically 100%, obviously you're not going to get 100% power, observe how the nose of the plane is going to start coming down. Our altitude is going to remain exactly the same, but the only thing that's really going to start changing is going to be our airspeed and that little bit of pitch that we had just a few moments ago. Now, the reason these things are all interrelated is, like I was saying, basically you've got that square of your speed. We're moving really, really fast. We're adding lots and lots of thrust to the plane, trying to build up absolutely as much as we can. And you can see we're barely taking the teeny tiniest chunk out of the air at these speeds. Now, watch what happens when we suddenly grab onto the glide slope. You can look out the window right here and see we're just about to grab onto that. Let me check to make sure that we're on the correct approach hold mode. We should be. Yeah, there it goes. Glide slope captured. So what's going to happen now is our plane is going to pitch down. We're going to take a teeny tiny little bite out of the air, and you're going to notice we're going to start picking up speed. But you're also going to notice the fact that the nose is now pointed exactly where the aircraft is actually traveling to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle all the way back to idle here. You can see again, now even though the plane itself, represented by this circle, we've got this little line here, as we're starting to lose speed, you can start to see that airplane starts taking a bigger bite out of the air. So now let's facilitate this process a teeny bit here. This is definitely the incorrect way to facilitate this process in the real world, by the way. It's a good way to facilitate destruction of the flaps on your aircraft. Starting to get slow, getting really slow here. There's 100 knots. Oh yeah, we're getting slow. Now notice we're starting to take the bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger bite out of the air now, and we're starting to get that increase of angle of attack as our airspeed is starting to come down. And again, remember, we're using flaps now, which is kind of a big impact on our coefficient of drag here. And we've gotten ourselves almost all the way down to our about 70 knots, and we're actually starting to slip below glide slope right now. So now notice the relationship now between the nose of the plane and the horizon. The plane is demanding that we actually increase the angle of attack, so I'm actually going to go ahead and increase the angle of attack. And you can see that the plane is basically taking this massive chunk out of the sky, and it's doing nothing. Basically, we're sitting here on our tail right now and not really achieving anything as we're starting to get up closer and closer to glide slope. Another thing you probably observe is our speed is more or less staying the same. So basically, we're sucking all the energy out of the plane speed-wise in order to maintain that desperate little bit of altitude that we need. And we can sit here at 65 knots all afternoon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the nose of the plane down. Notice my airspeed increases. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull the nose up. Notice that my airspeed is going to start biting out and start decreasing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to push the nose forward. And I'm going to go ahead and establish this kind of little angle right here. Obviously, glide slope wise, we're quite high. Let's go ahead and kind of push that nose down. Notice as my pitch comes down, my speed comes up. Notice I have not touched my throttle. I'm still chilling at 50% here. So what you're going to observe, and you've probably heard this one a million times, is you pitch for airspeed and then you adjust the power for descent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pitch the nose up. We'll go pitch it up pretty high here. We'll go up to about 75, and that should get us really low. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reduce the power here. So now notice what happens. As I pulled the power back, my rate of descent has started to progressively increase. Now if I add a little bit of power in, you're going to notice that the speed is not really going to change much, but our rate of descent is going to come down quite dramatically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the throttle back. Again, we're very, very high in glide slope here. And notice my speed more or less is going to stay the same. Go ahead and give it a push of power right here. I'm going to keep it roughly at the same pitch. You're going to get a little bit of a motion there. And you can see we've arrested our rate of descent by basically adjusting the throttle directly. So my pitch really has not changed that much. The only thing I'm adjusting now is my throttle. So now that I'm on glide slope here, I notice that I'm just a tiny bit below it. So what I'm going to do is tap the power for a moment. And I'm going to pull the power right back without adjusting the pitch of the plane. Now, did you see how I gave it that quick little squirt of power and all of a sudden we're right back on glide slope? Now notice our speed is still about the same, but we're now perfect on glide slope. Now if we were at glide slope were to start sinking a little bit, I could pull the power back, add the power back in. Now the trick here is if you have a throttle where it's really easy to feel where you need to put it, it becomes very simple to make that quick little power adjustment and pop it back in. So if you take a look at our glide slope right now, it seems like it's starting to trend down. Again, I'm not adjusting the pitch of the plane. I'm just going to go ahead and keep following this one to the ground, switch down to visual approach. Our sync rate's pretty good here. Again, coming in fast, and that looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and pull the power out, set ourselves up for our last couple landings here. Nose is going to come up at the last second. And this became at a pretty good speed. We're not going to use too much ground there. You can see that we settle down into the ground quite nicely. So again, the key thing that you want to see there is that little tiny glide slope. Rather than pulling the throttle back and waiting for the glide slope to catch up to you, what we did is pull it out for a moment and push it back in to knock that couple feet off that glide slope in order to put us back onto it. You could also see that as we sped up and slowed down, that angle of attack became very, very dynamic. It became very, very tricky in order to maintain it where we want, which is why when they always say, your landing's only as good as your approach kind of a thing, you can see how those different elements interact with each other. Another thing you want to keep in mind when you're experimenting with those kind of things is it actually works up as well. Now what I've done here is I've gone ahead and pitched the aircraft for 90 knots. Now this is basically a 15-degree climb. It's pretty significant. And you can see we're traveling at about 1,500 feet per minute up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my throttle. I'm going to go ahead and pull it back to 75%, which is pretty significant. And I'm not going to adjust anything as far as my trim goes. Now what you're going to observe is our speed is going to stay basically the same. But what you're going to see over on the right is my vertical speed went from 1,500 feet per minute down to 1,150 per minute, which is a significant decrease. If I wanted to, again, this is a very, very, very powerful aircraft. If I were to pull the power back to that percentage, 67%, you notice my speed is still roughly the same, but all that has really happened is my descent rate or my ascent rate, I should say, my climb, has significantly decreased again. Now, again, this is a very high performance aircraft, so I can do really silly things like pull down my power all the way to 55%. Again, my airspeed is not going to have a dramatic difference here, but you're going to see that my climb rate is down to, Cessna 152 speeds here without any adjustment in the actual climb rate that we have here. Now, the reason this is so valuable is if you're trying to climb at a constant rate, a lot of times you can reach through the throttle, it's a new device. It's a flap throttle. The throttle before you go ahead and try to reach for, pitching the aircraft, which is going to cause a speed change. Enjoy.